I'm thankful to be here with you today, and I am excited to be in conversation with two people who have dedicated their time, wealth, and voices to helping others, and who have enabled and championed generosity among so many other people. We will discuss the current trends and future of everyday giving and how it can be reimagined to address the deep inequities and the substantial vulnerabilities that we have exposed to and have seen over this past year and even the past few days with the winter storms in Texas. Now, Melinda, I'd like to start with you. As you reflect on all that's happened this past year and the impacts on the charitable sector, what stands out for you?
Thanks, Shena. Thanks for doing this with us. What stands out for me is, we're all seeing the effects of COVID. It's right here in our faces, in our homes, and in our communities, and globally on the news. And so many people are hurting. They're hurting, and they're lacking the basic services, whether it's health services or putting their kids in school or food. And so on the front line of that crisis are the nonprofits. They are the ones who know these communities, live in these communities, serve these communities. And so some of the most heroic work that I've either seen or really heard about really happens through these nonprofits. And they are vital for us to support as a philanthropic community because they know what's needed and what's going on.
That's exactly right. I think you're right to raise the attention to the nonprofit sector, their vitalness, how central they really are through this recovery, and how we're going to be, how necessary they are moving forward. That's exactly right. Bill, let's bring you into the conversation. We're talking about everyday giving here, and most people know that the two of you have partnered with Warren Buffett to create the Giving Pledge. We hear a lot about that in the media and in different circles. And that's focused on billionaire philanthropy, which is typically what people are thinking about when they're talking about philanthropy. Your support for everyday giving is not as well known. Why are everyday givers such a priority? We've talked about the nonprofit sector being a priority. What about everyday giving? Why is that a priority?
Yeah, well, everyday giving actually is over 70% of all giving. And if you value the additional work that people do, the volunteer work, the serving on boards, and the hands-on observation they bring where they see, hey, is this food bank doing what it should do? Is this after-school program really working well? It's those everyday givers who not only volunteer time, but they give feedback to make sure that the nonprofit is fitting into the community's needs and doing a high quality job. And that's never been more needed than it is now, where in a certain large sense, the government has put out stimulus money and will put out more. But the government can't design these programs to find everyone in need and make sure it's just. So you have about 15% of people who are suffering economically, even when the overall economy, income, poverty numbers are actually fairly good. So who's on the ground to either help figure out where those government programs need to change or just to fill those gaps? And that's partly where these unrestricted gifts and engagement from everyday giving go on. And so, any way to facilitate the field, if you could double either the big givers or the everyday givers, I'd pick the everyday givers because of that deep engagement. Now we want to double both, so we're big fans of all kinds of philanthropy.
That's right. And it all matters. And I like that you point out that the responsiveness of the everyday givers, that they are closest to the needs on the ground and in community. And I've always seen everyday giving and the importance of it as being an essential pillar of mobility. I know in my own life that the access that I received through school or government programs was really enabled by the generosity of friends and neighbors and church members who put in the extra money to make sure that I could actually access those opportunities. So it's a key lever in mobility for many in community, people's ability to be able to wait in order to receive the government assistance that they're going to have in a disaster, right? It is a critical form of assistance for folks, and I'm glad that you raised that. I think one of the things that we're seeing now is that everyone gets to participate in that everyday giving, and that we're paying attention to the diversity of the folks who are both seen and enabled in that participation. And Melinda, I'd like to turn to you, because when I think about this, I think about the giving of women, right? And how important they are to this conversation, and people of color, and what they bring also to their communities in doing this. How do we really think about making sure that everyone is engaged and seen as everyday givers, and enhancing the diversity of giving?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to measure what's going on, because today we don't actually know how many leaders of nonprofits are people of color or women or Latina. So we need to measure that. So that we know and that we're supporting those organizations, because again, they know their communities, they know what's needed, they know how to best serve their communities. We do have some statistics, luckily, on women-led organizations and organizations that are funding women, and really only about 1.6% of philanthropy flows towards women. So just knowing that, it is increasing, but knowing that is really helpful, because you start to see, well, where are the gaps? What are the needs? Is more money needed? Is less money needed? And I think we would start to learn that too about communities of color if we really measured it. The other thing I'll say about this COVID crisis this year is it has exposed these inequities that have been in society all along. It's exposed the gaps and the cracks, and we've seen that come forward. And what I have been really proud to see is a few big philanthropists step forward and say, I want to fund these communities who already know, these nonprofit leaders who know their communities. Mackenzie Scott made an enormous donation this year. She did a very systematic and analytic look at the field and said, these are the ones that seem to be serving low income and people of color, these communities. I'm going to trust them to do the right thing, and I'm going to make a big bet on them. And to me, that's just incredibly encouraging.
That is. And I think it's been really great to see the unprecedented levels of giving that corporations have done, and the commitments that they've made and are following through on at this point. And even large national foundations really pushing the conversation. And I'm hopeful in this new administration, with the executive order and the focus on racial equity, that even government giving, that a lot flows through nonprofit organizations, will also be turned toward that imperative of making sure that we are enhancing equity and driving greater diversity in who gets to lead and run these organizations. And I can't help the fact that you said more data. I am definitely committed to more data, and it is encouraging to see that we are starting to lean on technology a little bit more to help us measure what counts as a BIPOC organization. And we are able to do that by looking at the leadership and how leadership identifies, but also more broadly to the people that they're serving, where they're located. So I'm really looking forward to a good growth of interest and new metrics in this area. So appreciate the talk on the data needs out there. Have to always put a pin in that anytime that comes up, since that's so near and dear to my heart. But okay, to both of you, I just want to get into a little bit on this technology point, all the things that we have seen in the current trends. We've talked a lot about that right now. But looking ahead, how do we sustain what we've seen now? Americans and people all over the world have been super generous in response to the many crises we've seen over the past year. And we know these needs are not going away. I think, Bill, you quoted Churchill saying we're at the beginning of the end in this crisis. And so how do we maintain the momentum and sustain everyday giving going for the long term? What do you both see in that? Melinda?
Well, I would say that, as a group of philanthropists, we can look at innovations and we can look at things others are doing. So right at the beginning of the crisis, two people stepped forward. That was Reed Hastings and his wife, Patty Quinlan. And they said, we are going to give to historically Black colleges and universities. We know they need funding. That is a great place to reach out to community of color. We don't know what else to do to begin with, but we're going to start there. So that's a great example of just going ahead and giving. A second one is innovation. So one of the things that we as philanthropists, Bill and I, have done is support Giving Tuesday. We've given them over time $10 million to support Giving Tuesday. They raised last year from everyday givers $2.4 billion in the middle of the COVID crisis. And that money goes out to community-led organizations. And then, as you said, Shena, government can follow into those places. The other one that comes to mind as an innovation is Donors Choose. They started in the year 2000. They have now supported, because of everyday giving that's come into Donors Choose, they've supported over 600,000 teacher-led projects and needs, 85,000 schools. 78% of everything they've raised has gone into low-income communities. And so those are great innovations where everyday givers can go say, I want to give $50, I want to give $100, I want to give $2,000. And I think supporting those kinds of innovations is something we can do as philanthropists.
That's great. Bill, what are your thoughts on how do we sustain this?
Well, I think the ability to connect somebody who wants to be generous with a cause that's highly impactful, that digital should be very promising. After all, if you're living in a nice neighborhood, you may not see the needs in the inner city. And, the digital should let you go through and learn about those needs and the wonderful social service organizations. And then if you give money, seeing, okay, now they're doing more, and you feel responsible for that improvement. I would say we're in early days. I mean, Melinda cited a couple examples like Donors Choose that have been at the forefront and set a very good example. As part of what the event today, you're going to see a platform that Badr Jaffrey has done that's for Muslim givers. It's called Asana H, which because it matches up with Sharia law, the goal is to let people really see impact more. And so that's very exciting. And there's 3 or 4 other things. IDEO, the design company's gotten involved in trying to help think through some of this. I don't think we're yet where we need to be, where everyone feels like, gosh, I go online, I check on my charities, I check on new ones I want to give, and, encouraging people to up their target for that giving. And so through gatherings like this, hopefully we'll hear about who the innovators are, spread those best practices across this entire field. Philanthropy is more important than ever as the inequities and our understanding of how generational and how debilitating those are has increased. So, I'm thrilled. I hope we find some capacity there and we make it available to all the different nonprofits.
Thank you so much. You both have raised interesting platforms and technological advancements that are making it simpler, easier for donors to make the transaction, right? To when they see a need, to go ahead and find a place and a cause that's really advancing that effort and can do it effectively. But one of the things we are also seeing is donors are interested and are choosing to give directly to individuals. And we've seen through this time a rise in interest in cash transfers. And I know one of the things that we've been trying to do is think about across the world how those cash transfers can be designed for including women, Melinda, and being much more part of economic empowerment for them. Would either of you like to say anything about this sort of direct to the person kind of giving and the space that has in the everyday giving ecosystem?
Well, I think, as Bill said, these digital tools give us opportunities we haven't had before, either as governments or as philanthropists or individual givers. And so, just to give an example of what you were talking about, Sheena, India, for instance, because they do these they have on your cell phone, you have a digital bank account, they could do their cash transfers directly into people's accounts. Because they'd collected on the data on how many women, low-income women, had phones, they could direct those payments 200 million women through their phones. Indonesia's doing that, Nigeria's doing that. So there are technology plays at both the global and national level. There's technology plays for us as larger philanthropists, and there are technology plays for us as everyday givers to go and connect and say, I want to buy, chickens for a woman's farm in Africa. Those are all opportunities for us to give back.
That's great. And one of the things I'm hearing in this conversation is the importance that you all raise around everyday giving. You see it. You see it both in its value on the ground for the organizations and also in being able to have people express sort of this democratizing role, that they're expressing the causes and concerns that they have, and that it has importance in that way. So let's make the case to other funders out there. Why should others also care about everyday giving in the way that you both so clearly do? Is there a case that you would make to other billionaire philanthropists or other high net worth individuals or foundations to take the time to understand, think about everyday giving and invest in it as well?
Yes. A lot of countries look at the amount of everyday giving in the U.S., which of course we'd like to increase, but it is, amongst the highest. And they see that it really, in sort of a de Tocqueville sense, it strengthens the bond of the citizen because you're involved in seeing those service gaps, and you feel like you have a stake in making those things work better. In both my case and Melinda's case, our parents were strong everyday givers and strong volunteers, and so my parents, by setting a good example, really set me on a course. Along with Melinda's influence, that hey, this philanthropy is just this incredible thing. And so, you want the standard in society to be that, hey, we all give back. And as you move from, 10 or 20% to 50% participating, then it almost starts to become common sense and you get it up to very high numbers. And it's interesting, in some countries, the willingness to give exceeds the capacity of the sector. And so, we take for granted in the U.S. that we've had these nonprofit organizations. Yes, we can do more for them, but our ecosystem is much richer than in other countries. And so sometimes foundational support to build up the organization so they can be strong, with strong capacity, and then that will connect to that willingness to give. So, I think large givers can help bootstrap the sector and see what's missing. One thing we haven't mentioned is that in some communities, the community foundation plays a very, very strong role. And if you can get a large giver to fund the infrastructure of the community foundation, then the gifts can flow through with essentially very little or no overhead, and that community foundation can highlight recipients and help those nonprofit organizations do their job better. United Way also fits in together with that picture in the communities where it stayed very strong. So, bootstrapping this sector, the kind of long-term gifts that bigger givers can give. I really think in your own communities, all the big givers should get engaged in this help.
I agree. Melinda, is there a case to be made?
Absolutely. And as Bill said, when we think back on our own learning about philanthropy and then coming to this point of deciding to give these resources back, it really does come back to your family home. And, luckily, Bill grew up in a home where his parents were deeply committed to giving back to the community. I grew up in a home where we did lots of volunteering, and my parents did a lot of work giving back through the church. And so we had those values instilled in us at a very young age by both seeing our parents role modeling it, but then them also expecting of us to go out and do that work. And so what I would say to any large philanthropist is you are teaching your children and the next generation also how to do philanthropy by having them start in their own community. And I'll give you a perfect example. Bill and I in our own home decided when our kids were very young that part of their allowance, they needed to set it aside and start thinking about where they wanted to give it back. And even though it was only a small amount, they knew that, okay, if you get some, you also are going to give some. We took them out in the community to learn to volunteer. But literally just today, I woke up to a text. Our youngest child now is 18. She's a senior in high school. She was completely disappointed when COVID broke out, not only to not see her friends, but to not keep tutoring where she was tutoring because she felt like she had built a bond with students she wouldn't have met otherwise, and she felt like she was helping them through math and through their writing. So she was so disappointed. Well, I got a text from her overnight because teenagers stay up late, and she said, "Mom, check your inbox today because I have now decided to volunteer with the crisis text line in Seattle, and I put you down as a reference and they're going to email you today." And I bring this up because it's an example of the digital tools. Without the digital tools, she couldn't sit at home and work that crisis text line. And so as Bill said, as philanthropists, we can think of these digital platforms and how we help spark them, or as their ideas for them, support them so that they can go out and help others connect to our own backyard communities in need. And I think that's a role we can play as philanthropists, both in teaching the next generation, but also in supporting others to do everyday giving. And so I'm particularly glad that we got to have this conversation today, Shena.
Yeah, that is very timely. And I think focusing also on volunteerism, it really is bringing that up, which we've been talking about everyday giving, but everyday giving encompasses the giving of your time, talent, and treasure. So really raising the point around volunteering is really a great one to add. And I like that you both are describing this everyday giving both as something that we do, but a value that we transfer to others and the next generation. And I'm also excited that you're raising the points about digital tools enabling that, because as a parent, that's been something that I've worried about a little bit in trying to make sure that I'm able to transfer the norms around giving to my own children. Now that I'm doing that on the phone and making a donation and not sitting at a table with a checkbook anymore, I'm worried do they see me giving, or when we're not in a church setting where the offering plate comes by and they see that, so visible in their everyday life, are they missing those opportunities? And so really excited to hear both of you talk about how that's still possible. And I like this focus on making sure that all donors understand that investing in everyday giving is something that is essential, both because it helps transfer the expression of giving, but it also is necessary for the sector. One of the trends we've been tracking is the declining participation in giving. And Bill, you were saying we go from 20 up to 50%, and we're getting to a place where we're at a norm. But we know through data over the past, since the recession, that the number of Americans who report giving to a charitable organization has declined. 20 million Americans have walked away from that form of giving. It doesn't mean that they're not still generous. They're choosing to give in other ways or through consumption of their goods and other ways in which they're showing their benefits to society, but they're choosing not to give to the organizations. Let's talk about that a little bit, because you both are expressing this everyday giving in terms of giving to the nonprofit organizations and building up that infrastructure and how that's necessary. How do we make sure that participation stays high, that people see giving to nonprofit organizations as something to continue to do in addition to the other ways that they want to express their generosity?
Well, we have to say that a lot of giving, connects to your church, not only giving to the church, but the church's involvement in the community or even things churches are doing internationally. So they've been, at the core of a lot of everyday giving. And as some people are less engaged in church going, our ability to connect up with that person in terms of community volunteering and activity, that's a challenge. My family, including my mom, dad, and myself, were involved in United Way, which had a very powerful presence with payroll deduction. And, sadly, as the employment market has changed, or the idea of, your employer having the ranking of things has been less popular, that's less strong. And so that was and it's still strong in some communities, but that's faded out. So it is a disappointment. How are we connecting to people? Where do they get to sit down and hear from their friends about their giving? When do they get to go out and tour different things? I know as an employer, Microsoft matches employee gifts. Microsoft brings in the nonprofit organization and creates those exposures. So, business has a role to play here to make sure that as a citizen in the community, they're getting their employees very involved. But, we need to track. We've been talking about data. Why is it stronger in some communities than it is in other communities? And what has the sector done that has made people move away from it somewhat? What improvements do we need to make?
That's right. And some of the things that you all have invested in, like Giving Tuesday and Donor Choose, as you were saying, Melinda, have helped to bridge that disconnect so that the organizations themselves don't need to invest the money directly into building up that infrastructure to stay in contact, but they are enabled, empowered by these other platforms that help bring their causes and their results to the donor. And I think that is a good part. And maybe we just need more of that in the infrastructure, that sort of connective tissue that helps organizations meet the donors. Any thoughts about how you have, Melinda, been able to find causes or issues on the ground where that connection has been helped or enabled by any of these platforms?
Well, again, I go back to always, how do we teach our children over time? And so again, when they were younger, and then it's continued over time, you said earlier, Shena, about you wonder whether your kids see you writing that check anymore. And I do remember when I would go to church with my parents, they would put money or a check into the basket. So I saw that collection basket, the money going out. And as I got older, I as a child was expected to put $1 in the basket. But I think we can also, with our kids, again, these digital tools, we are learning how to connect, and COVID has ramped that up. And so when I think about our kids when they were younger, Bill and I started to take them online and say, okay, you hear about people, you hear about a crisis, and you hear about a flood in an area. We know when there's a natural disaster, people tend to open their checkbooks and send some money, go online. You can use those opportunities with your children to say, okay, that disaster's happened across the world. How might we connect as a family? How might we put some money down, or you from your allowance? That led to broader conversations of, okay, there are families that you have met. Our children were lucky to travel when they were young to the continent of Africa. Okay, you've met families who you've seen what need looks like there. We could go online together and investigate Heifer International. And our children would say, oh my gosh, if I saved up a bit of money, I could make sure a family had a flock of chickens or eventually a goat. Or maybe I ask as a child for one of my Christmas gifts from my grandparents is that they make a donation in my name to Heifer International or another organization online. I think those are all ways we can connect in different ways when there aren't as many people maybe going to church now or in the future. We have to figure out that connective tissue in our homes and with our neighbors and with some other neighbor that we hear is going out and maybe volunteering in a different place.
That's absolutely right. And we are connected. Thank you so much for raising the digital capacities are enabling the connection that we're experiencing right now through this platform and through this convening to have all of us all over the world being connected in this. I'd like to thank the two of you for your time, for sharing with us how personal everyday giving is to you. I especially enjoy hearing about how this came to you from your parents and how as parents you are transferring these values to your own children. This runs deeper. This sounds like than just something that you're doing in the foundation because of your interest in it, but also because it is just so important to you personally. And that's been a joy for me to hear and something that I feel that's inspired me as a parent as well. Thank you both for your time, and we will say goodbye to you at this point in the summit, but thanks for enabling all of this. And to the audience who's joined us for this portion of the summit, thank you for your time and attention, and enjoy the rest of the convening for today. And in the months ahead, I look forward to seeing you again at the summit. Thank you.